radio for the Agile community. www.Agile.FM.
Yeah, hello listeners to Agile.FM. Today I have Wes Higbee, a New York City resident who blogs at, very simple, weshigbee.com. And he's also with his own consulting company, Pool City Technology, and that's also the domain name, Pool City Technology in one word.com. Welcome to the podcast, Wes.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Hey, Wes, you have written a book. And that book is called Commitment to Value, How to Make Technical Projects Worthwhile. I mean, what intrigued me immediately about this line was worthwhile. There's some form of patience in this word, and I just want to explore a little bit. What is this book about?
Absolutely. You know, a couple of years ago, and a little bit about my background, I've been doing development for a number of years now, doing consulting work. And I think I came to the realization a couple of years ago that there was something fundamentally wrong about how I was approaching things. And I came to that realization through a lot of pain. And I think that's where the word worthwhile in the title comes from, is trying to reiterate that point. A little bit more about my background. So I worked a lot with customers, and we prided ourselves on working, I guess, differently. Probably we would align with a lot of the people that say they work in an agile fashion. We called ourselves agile. We worked very closely with our customers. I worked very hard to break down barriers between myself, the people I worked with, and the customers we worked with, so that we could have conversations and not have a lot of handoff and mediation involved, so that we could get to the point of what it is that people wanted. The problem was, like, as I was looking back at this after almost 10 years of doing consulting, I was kind of frustrated because I felt like we had this process where we listen and we don't have a lot of handoff in the process. So why is it that success in the work we were doing didn't really seem to be dependent so much on the talent of the people doing the work? So myself, the people I worked with, and even the talent of our customers. It didn't seem to be so much our talent, but it seemed to almost be luck. It seemed to be random when we would be successful and when we would not. And so that's frustrating to me because I'm a developer. I'm looking for the pattern and trying to figure out what's going wrong so that I can predict for it in the future and stop it from happening again. And looking for patterns, I just couldn't find any. I mean, there would be plenty of times where there was so much enthusiasm in the work we were creating, and then all of a sudden, a whole system goes unused. So we finish up, and then it just fizzles, or substantial parts of systems just fizzle out. There's a lot of enthusiasm, but then when the rubber hits the road, nobody's using it. And maybe people use it up front, but a year later, nobody's using it. So it was very frustrating to understand what made us successful, because then randomly you'd have those days where a customer would call and they would say, the system that we built just saved one of our customers $25,000, or just allowed us to do this, which we wouldn't have been able to do. So many of those random phone calls, and they're very uplifting for everybody involved in the process, but it was so frustrating to me to understand, why don't these happen more often? Why aren't these more predictable?
Predictable, right? So
Right.
what's wrong with this customer and service provider model? What is wrong with it?
Yeah. So what I eventually came back to, and what I started out in the book with, is that it's not that we didn't have the decent communication. It's not that we didn't listen to each other, and it's not that we didn't go back and forth on things. It's just that we tended to not focus at all on what makes a project worthwhile. And what I saw specifically in consulting is, a new customer will come to you off of referrals from existing customers, or just they hear about the good work you've done. They've got this amazing idea for a project because it's a burning, like, desire in their mind. It's a huge opportunity, or perhaps it's a huge problem, and it's something where you can have a substantial impact on their company. And we do, and that's what led people to want to work with us, was we had these amazing impacts up front because our process didn't impede us from giving them what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
The problem then is after that, people get excited when they see what can happen with software development, and they tend to think less about whether or not they should be doing something and focus more on what is in mind at the moment, especially because we tried to work very incrementally. We tried not to plan too much beyond a couple of weeks of work at most. And that worked out pretty well, especially when we had something worthwhile in mind. But what happened then is because people didn't have an impetus to understand why something should be done, it was more of a let's just see what can happen type approach. So our customer would just ask for whatever they want. We would deliver it as fast as possible. And that's where things head downhill.
Right, but the problem is often that the customers don't even know what they want.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so you can even have the problem to begin with when a customer comes to you and they don't have a substantial need in mind. That seems to be the trend. Matter of fact, I last night I was thinking more about this, and I can't help but feel like I'm beating the dead horse on this topic. So I put that in my blog post. But I really try to explain to people the breakthrough I've had in how I approach not just software, but everything in terms of business and life, is that it's more important to spend time thinking about why we're going to do something, what makes it worthwhile, than it is to just plow forward with the implementation. And so I like to always, in my mind, I always like to think of this for a long time now as you could imagine a two-dimensional person on a line, and they're just sitting there and they have an idea. They could take that idea and they could go one of two directions because it's just a two-dimensional person. They could go to the left or they could go to the right. To the left, they can ask themselves, why do we want to do this? To the right, they can say, how do we go about doing this? And so I like to have this dichotomy in my mind because that helps me understand that you have to choose which way you go up front. And what I found was in the 10 years of consulting I was doing was we were always choosing to just proceed with how. Wherever we landed with an idea on the spectrum from why to how, we just moved toward how. The problem is we needed to move toward why. And then the other thing, in my mind, because I can visualize this, is I understand that once you start moving in the direction of how, it's impossible to move in the direction of why. You just build up this cognitive dissonance to ever question what you're doing.
Right.
So last night I was thinking of this again. I'm like, you know what? A better way to express this, I don't know where it came to me, but I thought of a mountain. I thought of a person standing on a mountain. And instead of left or right, you could go up or down. So if someone's standing on a mountain and they have an idea, they could climb up that mountain. And that would be like asking, why do we want to do this? Why is this a worthwhile idea? What would we get out of doing this? Or they could just start climbing down, or they could just start descending, which is obviously much easier than climbing up. And descending is like going about how to do this. So it's plowing into the work and getting going with it.
But what we often see, or it is my experience, is that these problems you're stating, which is absolutely fantastic. Let's go back to that example, $25,000 you save the company by implementing. And often it's these estimates. Companies have some estimates out there. They for projects on a project level, they say this project has to be executed, it has the following benefits. But often what I see is that these features contributing to an entire system, not the overarching project itself, because it's so big often, that the individual features have their own contribution to the individual success. So what you're suggesting here is basically not a project, but maybe a feature by feature kind of assessment.
Somewhat, yes. I feel like projects have gotten a bad rap simply because we equate them with the failures in the past of over planning. The key, I think, is no matter if you're developing one feature or if you're developing an entirely new system, is that due diligence about what this can be worth before we just plow forward with implementing it and figuring out what it turns out to be worth. And it doesn't have to be an on like a year-long process to figure that out.
Yes.
But just even taking it's amazing when you take 5 minutes to ask why, and you have true honesty and trust in the relationship to actually ask those questions and get answers and keep going back and forth. It's just amazing what you can uncover in a matter of a couple of minutes.
Hmm.
Just I can think of a project I did recently where somebody's like, I just need this to be done, and they had a date where they needed it to be done. And I look for all these little things that I can ask why about. So my first question was, why by this date? And in doing that, I uncovered, because they hadn't shared it with me, that this was a stopgap solution. So they had never shared with me that this is not something they planned to use for a couple of years. It was something they planned to use for 6 weeks.
Hmm.
So by probing further with why, it was obvious that they really didn't know if it would be like 6 weeks or maybe 3 months or 6 months.
Hmm.
So there is a limited nature to the value of what this was going to be worth, which is going to, in my mind, limit what I should be doing for them. But if I hadn't stopped to even just for a couple of minutes discuss some of the why behind what we were doing,
Hmm.
I would have just had the what to do. And even though I was listening to my customer, that doesn't mean that that's what they need. It may
Hmm.
be what they think they want, but it's not what they need. So
That's right. So
yeah.
let's explore this topic a little bit, because you're very outspoken and have written about value-based pricing, and I think that's where we're going with this individual
Yeah, so part
idea.
of the mountain analogy, the next part that really came up was, okay, so up is why, down is how. So it's easy to go down. It's easy to just take the first path we can see. By going up the mountain, we get this broader perspective, and we have alternatives available to us. And that's simply by asking why, probing the worth of what it is we're doing. We engage the deliberate thinking mechanisms in our brain
Hmm.
to logically think about what we're doing, not emotionally think about what we're doing. When we just plow forward with how we're acting very habitually and very emotionally with that with the fast thinking part of our brain, which leads us to oftentimes jump to conclusions. So we have to kind of climb up and have some penalty, or pay some penalties as we climb up to do some things we don't like doing, but get something good out of it.
Hmm.
Now, along with the mountain analogy and getting back to pricing, for me as a consultant, one of the other problems we had that didn't help the situation was that we billed by the hour, and billing by the hour encourages a customer to worry about time, not about results. So that mountain analogy, I like to think of one more dimension to this. What if we had incentives to encourage people to deliver results instead of the default incentives, which are for people to just apply effort? Just look at business in general. If you're an employee, you're salaried, you're paid to show up.
Hmm.
And very few employees are given any incentive beyond punching a time clock. And a lot of them are like hassled about it. You got to be in by 8, you got to be, and out by 5, no overtime.
Right.
And, you can have 10 days of vacation. Like everything about an employee's job is specified in terms of the effort. The problem is there's no A for effort in business. It's all about results. So what if instead of the default incentives, oh, and even if you're not an employee, if you're like a contractor, you're
Yeah.
oftentimes paid by the hour. Consultants who are supposed to be, like, the very definition of a consultant is to deliver results, are still paid for effort. That just doesn't make sense. So what if
Mm.
you had incentives to reward you for effort? And for me as a consultant, that incentive is value-based pricing. For an individual and an organization, I've got another example that I would like to talk about here, which might be looking at how we can reward people for results instead of rewarding people for just working 50-hour work weeks.
Right.
So if you start thinking about those incentives in terms of a mountain, if you increase the incentives for results, in other words, outcomes, what makes it
Hmm.
worthwhile, the impact on the business, the impact on the customers, it's almost like you reverse gravity. It's like you reduce gravity a bit, and it becomes easier to climb up that mountain because people want to ask why if they're accountable to results. It,
Hmm.
and by wanting to ask why, they'll ascend that mountain. It'll be easier to go up that mountain because there will be something waiting for them at the top instead of just an arduous journey that they have to, drudge through, which is what I found myself doing. I wanted to, in this model where we were compensated for effort. I still wanted to do the right thing. That becomes a push and pull. Like there, it
Right.
becomes very it overburdens you, if you will. It taxes the individual to try and do the right thing while being rewarded for the wrong thing.
Right. But
Um,
Wes, so not every listener on Agile FM might be familiar with value-based pricing. Could you just give
yeah,
like a
let's
very,
dive into that a
yeah,
little
let's
bit.
dive in a little
Yep.
bit and just
Yep.
maybe you want to
Yep.
give an example of what it is, maybe just
The elevator pitch for this, or just
yeah,
to
exactly.
help people understand it, is simply this: I don't want my customers to pay more than what they get out of the work that we do together. So, and numbers are an easy way to talk about this. Dollars. I'll talk about dollars, but dollars are not the only thing involved. But simply put, if something is only worth, if something only is potentially worth, I should say, $10,000, I have no right proposing a fee for that project beyond a couple of $1,000s.
Mm,
So if something's worth 100,000, I have no right proposing a fee beyond maybe 10 or 20,000, because I want there to be a high margin between what my customer gets and what I get. Just
mm,
like you said, the likelihood of these outcomes actually happening is a factor we can't control. So how I go about that, and how most people in value-based pricing go about that, is we want a big margin.
mm.
We talk about conservative potential value of a project. I worry about liberal potential costs, as far as doing the work. But the great thing is, I'm not constrained to a set of specifications. We're not talking about, a report that does this, a system that does that. All we're talking about is the impact on the business.
That's right.
And so I have, when I come about these projects, it's not what somebody wants me to do. It's I get to figure out what I need to do to get them where they want to go. So
Right.
they give me a destination, I figure out the path. So that's another thing I talk about in the book, is the path versus the destination.
Yeah,
They
so the
give me a destination and I price based on that destination.
so value-based pricing, as far as I research, I would say I'm scratching the surface here by explaining that this way is more like for emotional niche markets. That's a very typical popular pricing model. But how does this relate to IT? Like
I
value-based?
think at the end of the day, it boils down to this. If you want to be paid for results, value-based pricing is how you would go about it. So
Mm,
if you want to create an incentive, because here's the thing, I can't come up with some fee that I can't justify in terms of the potential value that my customer has articulated to me. I don't articulate the value, my customer articulates the value. I can't justify a fee beyond that. I can't even justify a fee that's beyond
that's right.
a substantial fraction of that. That's how I hold myself accountable.
Mm.
So really, it can apply to anything if you want to be compensated for results versus being compensated for effort.
Right.
Um,
But let's say you're not an employee and you're like a consultant and you
yep.
work in a team of employees. You're like a lone star.
Sure.
Uh,
Yeah, there's a difference between and this is a very important difference that I have a lot of frustration because I run across people that want help in that capacity. There's a huge difference between a consultant and a contractor. And by that, I mean, there's a huge difference between somebody who's paid for results
mm,
and someone who's paid to just show up. A contractor is just like an employee. They're paid by the hour. Maybe they don't have the rigorous like 8 to 5 schedule,
that's right.
but they are just there doing what they're told to do typically.
But
But
like where I want to go with this, Wes, sorry if I interrupt you,
yeah,
but it's where I want to go with this is the from a from a customer service provider relationship as let's say a consultant, because I think that's more drastic example for somebody being on the outside of an organization. Yes, we want to listen to a company and we want to listen to the client and see what they and why they want to do these things. But at the end of the day, aren't we still dependent on their research and their analysis of why they want this? I mean, don't we have to swallow at some point the results of them? I'm playing devil's advocate here right now,
yes.
that they're saying this feature is worth X amount of dollars for me. Don't we have to trust that
I
kind of research?
Yes, you do. Like, and trust is a big part of the relation. But here's the nice thing. I like to question them on that up front. I like to know how. How is it going to be worth that? Because in asking that, we can uncover a metric we can use to gauge our success. So instead of just taking them at face value that something is going to be worth X,
Mm-hmm.
we can ask how, and a lot of times that will lead to more important things that we can have a conversation about. So I like to probe up front because a lot of times people are overly optimistic,
Mm.
and I would like to tell somebody up front, this sounds like a great idea, but look at the reality. And I had this happen with a customer, got really excited about, somebody had a big pain, right? And that we really should fix this. And if I had plowed forward with how, we would have gone down that path. But by stopping and talking about why we should do it, we uncovered that it might save one person like 5 hours of their time every week.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So someone was very passionate about how much of a problem this was. And if you had asked them to like quantify it somehow and qualify it, they would have come up with some ridiculous number to begin with. But by further refining it, it was obvious that what was important wasn't worthwhile.
Yeah.
And so that's also a part of the approach as well, is I get to help customers up front prioritize what they do.
Mm.
So
So
it's
you're
not just whatever they come with, but it's also like, well, what's the best thing we can be doing together first?
right. You're in the early stages of a project. What I liked about one of your blog posts, actually, um, people can read about is at weshigbee.com, is about when you purchase a fitness band or fitness watch or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many. It's even the Apple Watch is another reincarnation of this. I'm not going to say that people aren't going to get new things out of the Apple Watch, but we all want, like, or not all, sorry, people want the Apple Watch. It's like Apple creates that burning desire for the Apple Watch. But whether or not we actually need it, that's that difference that determines what it's worth.
Mm.
And that's the difference I'm trying to figure out when people come to me, is what I want versus what I need, just so that I can help my customers get what they need.
Mm.
Like at the end of the day, we can tackle all those wants if we first tackled all the needs. I'm happy to go down the path of wants once all the needs are exhausted, but I don't ever find people exhausting their needs.
Yeah.
As soon as you know how this goes. Like as soon as you satisfy one need, enough time has passed that there are new needs that are probably more important. And
That's right.
that's the nice thing about being a little bit more flexible in what we do, instead of like trying to go about something for like a whole year, instead of trying to have a project that spans a year. My projects, I like to keep them to the span of a couple of months at most, just because that's a good level to make a commitment on.
Mm.
And then beyond that, why don't if something is really going to take such a long period of time, I kind of like to think of it as sometimes there's these islands of value, and maybe this relates back to how you were talking about features earlier.
Yeah.
There are like islands of value and there's not just like a final destination to get to, but there are not coupled destinations, and that you have to go to all of them to get to the final one, but that there are worthwhile destinations between where we think we need to be and where we are now. And sometimes I like to go to those intermediate destinations and see if it's good enough,
Yeah.
or see if once we get there, is there a better final destination to get to.
Wes, are there any projects out there? So everybody listening to this right now, thinking about, I'm in IT, I do some agile stuff. Are there any kind of projects industry-wide? You mentioned length just a minute ago. Are there any kind of projects which scream some of your ideas might be ideal to be experimented with? Are there
I'm not.
any industries, let's say, more in finance, more in, you name it,
Oh yeah, yeah. To be sure, sure. So something that's ideal for.
for an
Uh,
experiment?
yeah, maybe this just gets back to like how I think that this doesn't just apply to me as a consultant, and that's that. We reward people inside organizations for just punching the clock and doing work. We had this like whole discussion of Agile versus Waterfall, as if Waterfall was the problem and Agile is the solution. And I really feel like neither of them were the problem. The problem is the commitment we're making. The problem is if we commit to a plan for a year, obviously that's going to be disastrous because we didn't think about what it's worth. If we commit to a plan for 2 weeks and it's not the right thing to be doing, we're not going to get the right thing out of it. So the problem is like stepping back to commitment. And, I was just thinking, I like to think a lot of off the cuff of how I would apply what I do outside of organizations, inside of organizations. So instead of rewarding people for efforts, and instead of the continuous nature of software development, what if we had these situations where inside of an organization, a team of people was able to say, for a quarter, we're going to focus on this result. So the company would like to do something that's coming from its strategy, probably. We would like to focus on this result. Say, for example, like a sales organization or somebody that sells stuff online. They aren't selling in Germany yet. So a team of people says, you know what, in the next quarter, all we're going to get done is opening up sales in Germany. And then they step back and they say, what could that be worth to us? Do we have projections for the amount of profit and revenue that would come as a result of that? And maybe somebody inside the organization can help them understand that by expanding sales into Germany, that could lead to another $500,000 in profit every year. And that's a conservative estimate. I would encourage people to do that conservatively. Yeah. But there's also there are so many tangibles and intangibles. I like dollars though because it gives me something to talk about. So the team says, okay, so opening sales in Germany is our goal. That's something we could, or actually the question they would ask next is that something we could get done in the next quarter? Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but could we open up sales in Germany in the next quarter? Is that something reasonable? And if you have a team that's very tight with the organization and they've already opened up sales in other areas, or they just know the business in and out, and they're truly cross-functional, not just in terms of like development and testing and release and supporting applications, but also in terms of having people that understand the business as a part of that team and that can make other changes to the business beyond just software. If they're truly cross-functional, they should be able to answer that question. Can we do this? And so then they could make a commitment. All right, quarter one, our goal is to just open sales in Germany. And the reason it's worthwhile is because it will lead to $500,000 in profit on a yearly basis. And then they can step back and they can, even in an organization, it's really simple to look at costs for people at least. Just tally up their salaries. And let's say that they've got a team of 4 people that in quarter one will charge up $100,000 to the company. So you've already established a 5-to-1 return there. So even if the 500,000 isn't conservative and is a little bit liberal, what's so wrong with 400 or $450,000 in profit? It doesn't need to be precise. There's still plenty of margin for error in the actual potential value there. And that's just in the first year. That's not even to mention the years thereafter. So that, is being conservative there. So they plow forward with their goal, and their only objective is to open sales in Germany. So when somebody asks about progress, you frame it in terms of, are we selling things in Germany? If we aren't, well, what are we doing to get there? Like, the progress doesn't need to be stories done, velocity, burn down charts. It can simply be, have we opened up sales in Germany? And if I were a team, I might start thinking, well, can we open up sales in like in Berlin first or something like that? Can we like take a little piece of it and get going there? And so within 2 weeks, could we say we've opened up inside of this part of the country? And then every 2 weeks we're opening up in another part if there are challenges because of the parts of the country. So but the team can decide that. So somebody doesn't need to like up front figure out a bunch of stories involved. People can just figure that stuff out as they go along as far as what they're going to need to do. The only thing the team has to do is decide, is this something we really can commit to for the quarter? And then they go about doing it. And then I like to take this further. So we need incentives though. We need incentives for people to work within this model. And I can think of an amazing incentive for people in an organization. And that's it. If you can get done early, then all the time that's left in that quarter doesn't need to be put into anything else. You can do what you want with that time. So when we're picking projects, the team should also be cognizant of how much time they might like to have for other things. And so when they're making a commitment, they should consider that they don't want to commit for 100% of that quarter, such that they can actually get done early. in the best case scenario. Maybe
Yeah,
in the worst case scenario, they run over, but is that a big deal? I mean, they spend a little bit beyond a quarter, is no big deal. But in the best case scenario, they get done early, they can do whatever they want. They can invest in education, they can pay off debt. That's always a big thing people focus on. They could start focusing on what will be the result to hit in quarter two.
but this obviously what you just described changes the model of how people and organizations are going to work quite drastically.
Yes.
It's a different way of thinking,
Yeah.
and a lot of those things will be described in your book, Commitment to Value: How to Make Technical Projects Worthwhile. What else would listeners get out of this book? What other ideas?
You
If
know,
you could just give some examples.
the last big thing that I think is so important is that we need to spend less time worrying about how we're developing software. We need to spend more time looking outward toward our customers. I know we talk with customers a lot. I think the word customer is somewhat ambiguous, so let me define that first. The customer is the person that our organization provides value to. So if some people think of customers and users and they get them mixed up, but we need to actually be looking out at those customers more. And even if we're having conversations with them, we need to take the time to understand what they're asking us for, what it's actually worth. So, and a great case in point is I don't hear enough people talking about what it's worth to the customer so much as what it's worth to our organization. People like to frame things in terms of like, what's the opportunity for our organization? But it goes beyond that.
There's
Say,
gonna
for
be,
example,
but best, there's gonna be a lot of work for our product owners out there.
yeah, I think it's a lot of work for everybody involved because I think that this is a role that everybody in an organization needs to be aware of. I spent so much time trying to remove the barriers, which is another thing I talk about in the book, such that everybody that works with me has an understanding of what we're actually trying to accomplish. So I'm never like passing from the customer to the people building. The people building have are and maybe it goes back to this idea that like in the Agile manifesto we talk about business people versus developers.
Mm.
Developers are business people. If you're part of an organization, you need to know what your organization does to contribute value to your customers. It's not okay just to pass the buck at a product owner or whatever the role may be and have handoff there. Everybody needs to know so they always have that opportunity in mind to maximize that value. Otherwise, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the people on the team are just stuck being people that walk a path with no understanding of why they're going to a particular destination.
Yeah.
Um,
But like just to stick with your example from Berlin before in Germany and opening the sales in that country, just to
yep,
stick to that example,
yep,
from what you're describing is more on an organizational level, like let's open sales in Germany and we go about it. A fraction of that might be only related to an IT system. There might be many, many other processes in place to
absolutely,
take care of that. So
absolutely.
when
And
we,
that's
what we
where,
do in Agile is often is that we do have that. A lot of people do Scrum. We have this product owner, and only that fraction of features would make it into a backlog, and those features are now disconnected just in terms of where they live from what the business objectives are. How would you
yeah.
tie all these concepts together?
Yeah, you know, I that's where I see cross-functional going beyond just the development side. Just to put it in terms I think we're all familiar with. We
Hmm.
like to like I see so many organizations even claim to be agile, yet they have development department, QA department,
Hmm.
uh, you know, operations department. They don't understand that the nature of a lot of what we're talking about is rethinking the organization and how it operates. I think it has to go beyond that. I think that like the buck stops at delivering value to our customers. So we have to have everybody on the team that's a part of making that happen. So if the objective is to open sales in Germany, you may only have one person in a technical capacity on that project or two people.
Hmm.
You're also going to have people that actually understand what you might have like a full-time person that just understands the change that's going to have to happen to the rest of the organization that works to make sure that that happens. And you are going to have like literally consultants throughout the organization that you're going to have to reach out to too. Perhaps there are accounting issues that you've never encountered before, so you're going to have to reach out to that person. You just have to have a team that has the competency to bring together within the team all the skills that are necessary and then the knowledge to reach out to all the right people to make this happen. And so it can't just stop at software, because like you're saying, software is just a means to an end. And if we just tuck features away in a backlog, what I found is then we just get these backlogs that grow ridiculously long, and the people doing the work don't have any means of understanding why the work is in there. So they can't even, here's the other thing too. Instead of putting even stories in a backlog, I like to peel the onion back to what it's worth, because then technical people blow me away continuously at how creative they can be, if given the capacity to be creative. So instead of having features there, they can look at alternatives. And as long as at the end of the day, we are delivering value to customers, it doesn't really matter how we do it. And that kind of goes to this analogy that I always like to say, that there's no wrong way to do the right thing. So let's just set in for a second. There's no wrong way to do the right thing. Unless somebody wants to play with some crazy psychopathic scenario. In general, if you're doing the right thing, you've got to be able to trust the team to do that. And it doesn't matter how they go about doing it.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
And there might be many different ways of doing it, right?
Yeah. People that use Scrum will continue to use Scrum. People that have never been exposed to a methodology in software development will have the constraints from the value they're delivering to create the methodology that they need. And at the end of the day, as long as sales are open in Germany at the end of the quarter or at the end of the next quarter, because who cares if it took 2 quarters? That would still be a 250% return on a yearly basis. That's what success is at the end of the day, and it's easy for everybody to see that too.
So it comes down to metrics, it comes down to measuring success, it comes down to profit margins, and we do come, as you just said, at the end of the day, we're coming to the end of a podcast where we explored quite some interesting topics. And whoever listened to this podcast episode realized that you have a very interesting story about how you would approach any project. Agile, probably very suitable for that, testing out your ideas, about how to start projects and asking more why questions in the beginning of a project. Wes, it was a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Joe, it was a pleasure to be on.
But I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Did you order your Apple Watch?
No, I do not. I will not buy an Apple Watch. I was burned by the basis. It was a great watch, but I just at the end of the day, it did nothing for me. Okay. So if that was that want versus it did, I had no need for it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on this show and sharing your thoughts and ideas. And I just want to reiterate here for everybody listening, at foolcitytechnology.com. You can see more about Wes and his services, and weshigbee.com, his blogs, and his book, Commitment to Value, How to Make Technical Projects Worthwhile. Released in April 15. Congratulations to that.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for listening to Agile.FM, the radio for the Agile community. I'm your host, Joe Krebs. If you're interested in more programming and additional podcasts, please go to www.agile.FM. Talk to you soon.